Welcome back. It's now time for Data Point, and we want to reflect on the quality of grades that are coming from our learning institutions in the public sector, and that is on Data Point. Let's begin with the figures as we know them. The first one is that in the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education KCSE exam that was sat just recently in November 2024, and results released, 962,512 candidates sat that examination. Out of that, 246,000 or 26% qualified to join the universities because they scored between a C+ and an A. Those that did not qualify, meaning they scored less than C+, that is the grades from C down to E, was 74%. That figure is important, and I'll be telling you why. Because if you had to look at the students that qualified for universities, the 246,000 of them, 14% of them came from the national schools. We're talking about 34,288. This is important because if you look at that figure of 4%, it means that only 4% of learners in secondary schools are in national schools, but 14% are contributing to the top grades of between C+ and A. In extra counties, schools that have 21% of the student population in Form 4 that year, the 40% qualified for universities, meaning that out of the 246,000, 40% came from extra county schools. For county schools, which hosts 15% of the learners, the good grades from better grades from C+ all the way to A plane were 14%, which is some 33,744. And the sub-county schools, which host majority of the cohort, which is at 54%, they were only getting 25% of the grades that are going to the university, equivalent to 61,000. At the private institutions that host 6% of the students, it is 7% contributing to the total of students joining universities. Let's focus on something else here, which is to do with the non-qualifiers, the other side of things. In the national schools, those candidates that didn't qualify, out of the 712,000, national schools only contributed 1%, which is 6,910. Extra county schools, 14% is the contribution to the students that didn't qualify for the universities. If you have to look at the county schools, 110,000 did not qualify for the universities, which is equivalent to 15% of their total class. But the mass of the class is at the sub-county schools. This is 457,000, meaning that 64% of those that did not qualify for universities, to join universities, came from sub-county schools. Now, these are schools that are majorly day schools and in the rural areas. And then for private schools, they contributed 6% of non-qualifiers for the university admission. Let's focus on something else, which is to do with the data from the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education released by the Ministry of Education of these qualifiers. So let's look at the quality of grades. For the national schools, 83% of the class qualified. Only 17% missed opportunities or will miss opportunities at the university. In extra county schools, it's almost a 50-50 because 51% of those students in extra county schools qualified to join universities. 49% did not qualify because they scored less than a C+. In county schools, it is 23% of learners in county schools that qualified to join universities. 77% did not. So this may start to tell you the probability of your learner getting to qualify for university if they go to some of these schools. In sub-county schools, 12% only qualified to join universities, meaning 88%, which is a huge number, did not qualify. In the private institutions, 30% who qualify to join universities. If they choose to do so, 70% will not because they scored less than a C+. But now, what does this tell us in as far as the quality of grades? This is a quick one. For the A plane, a grade, which only 1,693 scored that across the country. 81% of that came from national schools. 9.6% came from extra county schools, and county schools and sub-county schools were sharing or were getting less than 1% of that. For those that's called A-, which is over 7,700, 60% came from national schools, 27% came from extra county schools, only 2% came from county schools, and only 4% came from sub-county schools. For B+, which is also a good grade for especially the prestigious courses, 36% of them came from national schools, 40% came from extra county schools, 6% came from county schools, and 10% from sub-county schools. For the B plane, 19% came from national schools, and 44% came from extra county schools. So this tells you something, that from the extra county schools, most of the students are getting the B plane and B+ and also B- at 42%. But but you can see that the other schools, like sub-county schools and county schools, are not getting as much in the top the top grades of the class. Let's take a look at something else, especially for the other grades. On C+, majority of the C+ scorers came from extra county schools. You can see how the numbers compare with sub-county getting about 32%. But now, this is important. For grade E to D+, which is 74%, came from sub-county schools. This is important because it then tells you the sort of performance in those institutions. If you look at another grade like C-, 48% is coming from sub-county schools. And let's take a look at what else, because when you reflect on these figures, is there a problem? Let's see if there is, because these are publicly funded institutions. How much is that? We'll look at that in the next slide, which will tell us the amount of money that has been invested in some of these institutions. First of all, in the financial year 2023-2024, which is the year that financed half of the year that they were in school, 628.6 billion shillings was the initial figure allocated to education. Out of that, the free day secondary education, which is an amount that is allocated to every student who is in a public secondary school, whether boarding or not, the total was 65.4 billion shillings for capitation. Let's take a look at something else that will tell us something. For the financial year that we are in, 24-2025, the free day secondary education capitation, this is for Form 2, 3, and 4, the figure is 61.9 billion shillings. You notice it has gone down slightly because there's no Form 1 class. The Teacher Service Commission has been allocated 358.2 billion shillings. That figure could have gone higher because there are new enrollment of teachers that is going on. The basic education funding is 142.3 billion shillings. This is for all the way from the first level of education up until Form 4, and that gives a total of some 500 billion shillings. That is the Teacher Service Commission and the basic education. This is an approximate of how much it would have cost to teach the class of 2024 since they were in Standard 1 up until Form 4, because this is an amount that covers the entire class. So for 500 billion shillings, but you end up with 74% in some of those institutions scoring between E and D+, is their value for money. For that investment, 88% of learners in day schools are scoring less than a C+, majority of them at about 69% scoring D+ and below. Is their value for money? Is there a conversation to be held? And that is the data point for this week.